You're listening to Berlin Psychoanalytic podcast with Jungian analyst Jakob Lusensky and psychologist Lisa Malmheden, discussing Jakob Lusensky's new book, Carl Gustav Jung, Face to Face with Christianity, Conversations on Dreaming the Myth Onward. I had the great pleasure to read your upcoming book, Carl Gustav Jung, Face to Face with Christianity, Conversations on Dreaming the Myth Onward, where you, through a row of discussions with prominent scholars of the field, explore this intersection between Jungian analysis and Christianity or spirituality. And seeing as probably most of our listeners or viewers of Berlin Psychoanalytic are probably fairly acquainted with Jungian analysis and its theory and concepts, they are perhaps less so when it comes to its spiritual or Christian aspects. So would you mind sharing some of the key themes explored in the book regarding this intersection of Jungian analysis and Christianity?
Absolutely. I wanted to say on this theme of Christianity, I think that in order to understand Jung, it's important to understand something about Christianity, because Christianity is the foundation, or it's the culture, it's the religious or spiritual tradition that he was deeply, deeply steeped in growing up, for good and worse. Father being a pastor, 5 other uncles or so being pastors. He went to church from early age. So Christianity was something that he wrestled with. And actually the first title of the book was Jung's Wrestle with Christianity. But then we changed it to Face to Face to Christianity. So I think it's helpful to understand something about Christianity, to understand Jungian thoughts, Jungian concepts. As an example, we could speak about his concept of the shadow that many people know about, and shadow work and shadow integration. In many ways, what Jung is doing there is to take an old Christian concept of sin, and the idea that we have also a sinful nature, that man is not only good and striving to the good, but we also have a sinful nature. We sin, we don't live up to our standards, we lie to people, we betray. It's also part of human nature, and we need to acknowledge that, because if we don't acknowledge that we're sinners, we're probably going to do the biggest sin, and that is believing that we're God, or that and transgress in other ways. So this is just one of many, many concepts that Jung sort of smuggles into modern 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s language, or psychological language, or the psychological language of the time. I think he develops the psychology to be able to speak about essentials, what it means to be a human, what it means to exist, what it means to be in relationships. And I also think one of the reasons for writing the book is also there can be a certain ignorance. I dare saying this because I've been very ignorant myself. I think there's a certain ignorance in relationship to Christianity. And the way that I've come to understand Christianity is as a depth psychology, if you like. I mean, I guess if you look at all religious traditions, if you go deep enough, you see it's kind of, working on human nature and the questions of evil, or the questions of the purpose of a human life. So it's really existential philosophies, and Christianity is the same. It's just been, I think me growing up, and you as well in Sweden, the most secular country in the world, I did not, get Christianity with the breast milk. It was something that came in much later in my life. So I've been very ignorant. And I think, again, to understand Jung and to understand oneself, I think understanding something about Christianity is very, very helpful. And also, Jung, when he speaks about the unconscious, Jung is not just some sort of progressive. Although his ideas might still feel partly progressive, he's actually quite conservative in regards to his emphasis on historicity of the psyche, or he's even speaking about, and this can be problematic, about like Christian unconscious, or like, whether we want it or not, on some level, that those are the morals and those are the frameworks that we think around people like us who grew up in a secular Christian world. And we might not, know much about it, but when it comes into our relationship to our bodies, to our sexuality, to the question of power, for example, that he would say that the Christian sort of morals, or the Christian, story is still alive in us in some way, good or bad. So that was Jung's big wrestle. So this book is an attempt to look at in what way and why Jung spent so much of his life wrestling with these questions, and in what way this question or the question of Christianity could be important for us today. Because I think many people thrown it away, and I mean, it has done much bad, and it has a very bad reputation in that sense. So I think it's a way for me to speak to other scholars and people who have spent much more time than me on this topic. It was a way for me to try to make sense of why Christianity or why religion could be important for us today, or what of it, or in what way these messages might still hold some truth. And if so, what are the things that we need to reform in order for it to be vibrant again? And I think that's, and I will stop after this, but I think that was also Jung's project, to try to sort of rejuvenate, if you like, or reform, possibly, maybe it's too strong for a word, but a wish to reform Christianity or the Christian myths, as he would say, in order for it to make sense for us as individuals living in our time.
Yeah. And as I really liked how someone in the book put it, that through his answer to Job, the book from Jung, it seems like Jung put religion or Christ on the couch to find this kind of other sort of religion that is more accessible, or a religious domain or a spiritual domain that is more accessible to people apart from this established and how all of these, everything looks like a lot today, which I find very interesting. Yeah,
I think that speaking of a reform or psychoanalyzing Christianity or putting God on the couch, as someone said about an answer to Job, I think that's really heavily engaging in this concepts and in this tradition, and being quite critical, but not throwing it all away, but engaging in these questions. I don't think he did that just out of curiosity. I think he did that out of despair, or out of of trying to make sense of his own life. So it's not like it's a logical wrestle only. It's more like, I think, again, trying to come to terms with his own nature and all its contradictions. Like psychoanalysis in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. More of like an existential wrestle. Because I also really get that feeling when I'm reading through the chapters that there was this strong wrestle going on, and the word is also mentioned many times in the book as well. So it's really clear that it was a wrestle for him, and that it's ongoing, and that it's something that he maybe left for us to continue with, and especially interesting for someone such as you and I, who grew up in a society where it's like highly secularized, and anything religious or spiritual was almost taboo, and to see or explore what spirituality, or like the Christian tradition that has been a part of Sweden too before, has an impact on us, and explore that possible access that we have to it. Because I feel like there is this, like when reading the book, I feel like that in Jungian analysis, that there is this kind of domain of spirituality that can be very healing, and for a client or an analyst or an analyst, for anyone. And when I'm thinking about the title of your book, Face to Face with Christianity, which I believe is partly probably inspired by the interview that Jung conducted in 1959 with John Freeman. And while they were talking about his religious upbringing, Freeman asked Jung about his faith, initially just like, did you believe in God? And quite naturally, it feels like he said, oh, yes. And then Freeman continued to ask with the questions like, do you now believe in God? And Jung quickly kind of says, now. And then his facial expression changes into this kind of secretive smile, and he continues like, difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know. And I find that very fascinating. And I find it also fascinating how this discussion, or this quote follows you throughout the book. And we learn also, of course, about the different interpretations that the scholars have of this quote from Jung and what it means and entails and what it everything. And I will ask you about your own interpretation of this quote. But before, I wish to just say a couple of things of how and what way this quote sort of accompanied me throughout the chapters of this book, if it's okay. Because it was not necessarily only like in a way that was focused on exactly what Jung meant by this for him personally, if he believed in God or not, or if he knew that God existed or not. But it kind of brought up this question of the access to spirituality when it comes to believing versus knowing. And what I'm trying or wish to point out is what we touched on before, is that when you've grown up in a secularized society and you have nothing to do with religion and stuff like that, reading in the book about these curative aspects of the spiritual domain and Jungian analysis, it honestly makes me feel a bit jealous, because it really seems that some people or many people are lucky enough to have access to a spiritual realm, where they can kind of fathom and integrate these soothing remedies for their existential angst, so to say. And I think, have this opinion or feeling or view that faith or spirituality is not necessarily something that you can decide for yourself about to believe in. But when you're accompanied by Jung's quote, this believing versus knowing, it makes it seem as though one almost can, which seems incredibly intriguing to me. But I don't know if it makes sense, but it's just like a train of thoughts that follow me through like the whole reading of the book.
Are you saying you can because it's not about belief as much as experience? Or in what way does it open you up, this quote?
I think, for me, I think at this stage, because I haven't, read much Jung yet, and I read even less religious texts and stuff like that. But I think it might sound very, I don't want it to sound too kind of cheesy, but this kind of knowing that he says makes the belief not play as much role in the situation, and kind of gives you access if you decide to believe in it, if you let it come to you, if you're open to it, kind of, then spirituality is also accessible for those that maybe don't have faith in a traditional sense.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that's an interesting reflection that you said carried you through the book, or that you had with you. It's a very old conflict or dynamic in Christianity. You speak about gnosis or pistis, sort of experience or faith. So this is like what is faith? Is it the balance of the two? What needs to be emphasized? I think, Jung grew up with a father who said, "Don't ask so many questions, just believe."
Oh, yeah,
yeah. Right. So this is like, that was like, it was all, just take this and eat it, But he ate it, and he went to, confession, and it was just, he says, the bread, it was dry and the wine tasted sour, and he didn't do anything to him. He didn't touch him. He had so much expectations for his first confession. So I think, again, but then you could just throw it away and, like say, this is not for me. But Jung, he definitely threw Christianity away for some time, but he soon again started to engage with it with his whole, intellectual thinking, but also, through his dream work and through his paintings and drawings in the Red Book. So of course, the question then is also like, which God is it that Jung believes in or has experience of? What type of God? That's another question that comes to mind, because everyone and many people have thought and pondered about what does he mean, and is there blasphemy to say that you know and you don't need to believe? It's a very strong statement of sorts, but so it's clearly Jung had very sort of numinous and spiritual experiences, but the question of what the God he had experienced or what he meant by God is maybe still unresolved.
Yeah, I think it very much is, or like it feels like it also when you read it in the book, and but it's an interesting way to kind of phrase it, and especially the smack on his face as well. It's absolutely something that very entertaining. Yeah. But yeah, I guess I'm thinking a lot about if there is some kind of innate longing in the human being for openness to spirituality, or that's kind of the question I'm thinking about. But
Jung would say yes on this. No, he would say that there is a self, there's a human self that's waiting to be realized. We are not born in the Freudian sense as a tabula rasa, and then we're sort of made into things because of our environment. Jung doesn't say that the environment is very, very important, but he's a believer in that there is a self, that there is the image of God, with imago Dei, in a person that waits to become, that wants to be realized through this process, what he calls individuation. And so he would probably say, he speaks also about the religious instinct, that there is a religious instinct or religious need, like hunger or sexuality for he calls it wholeness, but we could also say to find spiritual purpose or spiritual connection or acceptance. There's many ways to speak about it, but Jung places that as a human need of sort, or a human instinct to become, as he says, then who we are, or to become spiritual beings, Yeah. Having said that, I don't think that everyone that goes into a Jungian analysis needs to necessarily come out as Christians or Muslims, but I think there's a sensitivity to spirituality. For me, has a lot to do with sensitivity and a certain openness, as you say, to existence, and to try to accept existence or see existence as it is, not through your projections, not through your complexes, or see the other as he or she is. So I think all psychoanalysis done right, as much Freudian or classical done right, is sort of, as Don Carvet would so say, it's all a spiritual practice, because we are transforming narcissism, or we're trying to work on overcoming narcissism to become more loving human individuals. I think it is it's a spiritual practice of sorts.
Yeah, also, the concept of evil. I think you mentioned the concept of evil as well in God, and how Jung was criticizing Christianity as well, of course, and especially like excluding, you talked about before the shadow and all that, the dark side. And I understood it as such that he suggested to introduce like a fourth to the doctrinal trinity to achieve this wholeness, because also bringing in the imitatio Christi, which differs from the Christian view of how, following the example of Christ, that is also explored in the book. I don't know, do you want to say a few words on that?
Yeah, both these two themes, the question of evil and how you reach that question, and the question of imitation of Christ, or what is Christ's role in for a human individual living today, are big themes, as you say, in the book, and something that the conversations naturally continue to ambulate around. And I think on the question of evil, I cannot give a good answer, but I think the question that Jung was exploring was this age-old question of why God allows evil to exist.
Yeah.
Why allow evil to exist? And Jung was very fond of, or very engaged with a bet between God and the devil, and God basically allowing the devil to treat him like this, to test him if he was really a man of faith. So Jung clearly identified with Job in his life, also like as he was tested or as he was punished at times, or and so this is a very deep myth that he then, in answer to Job, tried to give his own answer to why God allows evil and why evil exists. Not to go into too deep to it, but in Jung's rendering, God, it holds also an evil side. So he actually places evil within the self, or like the God image in man, and he puts it in God. So there he's becoming this very Gnostic Christian, if he's a Christian. I think he is, but a very Gnostic Christian, given that the God is not all good. God is not only a savior. God has the capacity for evil. which was, of course, a heresy. And again, then he was a Gnostic, and that's not. And then Jung tries to defend him and says, like, oh, well, I'm not really saying that God has these sides. I say, like, the God image in man has these different sides. I cannot say anything about God, he can say. So he sort of retreats to his scientific persona, but then he's again maybe mixing it a little bit up. So the question of evil, I think, is important for everyone. And Jung is just giving an answer to Job and having a very different interpretation than many of the Christians then that are emphasizing and holding where the foundation is that God is all good and evil is the absence of good.
Yeah.
And so this is a theme that is very deep, but I think if one want to read Jung on it, one should of course read Answer to Job, but I would highly recommend not to read Answer to Job if you haven't read the book of Job first, because some people, and I think myself included, went directly for Answer to Job. And this is again where Jung is very difficult and kind of problematic when it comes to Christian themes. And even Mark Stein, which I also have conversations with in the podcast, who has spent 40, 50 years on Jung and these questions. He also says this book is a book possibly about the God image and how it changes, but it's also a book about Jung's countertransference. This is one of the supporters of Jung saying this. So it's just to say that there's a lot of there's a lot of Jung wrestling with his own past there. So but it's a work that really stimulates the mind and tries to engage very passionately and seriously with questions of uttermost importance. Today, as at Jung's time, uttermost importance, how seeing all these things are happening in the world, and how can one believe? How can one have faith in a God, or in a forgiving God, when one sees what's going on? How could one must has to be a madman or a child or the other thing is the Imitato Christi. It's the question that's also a very old Christian concept that we learn that we should practice a following of Christ, leave our belongings, leave our families, and follow the spiritual path in order to find peace, in order to find happiness, or in order to find peace. And Jung, already from the Red Book and onwards, he's wrestling with this concept of what does it mean to follow Christ in this time or in Jung's time. And he is then saying that the way to imitate Christ is not to imitate Christ. And that what he's saying about that is to say, like, as soon as you try to imitate something, where you try to imitate a god or an idol or something, you're no longer yourself. Becoming that person that you idealize, and you're sort of actually not individuating, you're adapting to another's image. Of course, adaptation is a part of individuation. There's not like we are not. I think that's how we develop and how we grow. But just to say that Jung has done a very radical rendering of imitation of Christ, and says, if you really imitate Christ, you're not a Christian anymore. Because you have to break with the tradition. Christ didn't succumb, or he didn't follow the collective. He went his own way. And Jung's of Christianity and Jung's concept of individuation has to do with becoming who you are. And that sometimes that can be at the expense of what others want of you, or what the world wants of you, or what's seen as prestige or the most statusful thing in the world. So this is again a too short summary of something that's very complex. And I think many of these people I speak to have very articulate and interesting ways to explore this question. But I just wanted to say, and then I'll stop. I think this is a question that's also relevant for today. Even if you haven't grown up with, Jesus Christ, I think that the question of living your own life and what does that mean today is kind of still, I think, very potent.
Absolutely.
But in that, of course, Jung also had huge issues with Jesus Christ, and he sort of reduced him to this is very blunt to say, but he sort of reduced him to an archetype of sorts. That's, of course, very, as a religious people, that's a very problematic thing to do, to just make him into a story of many. He's not he's not a redeemer, he's not the forgiver of sins, he's not the son of God in Jung's rendering. So if Jung was a Christian, he wasn't a Christian, most likely praying to Jesus.
Super interesting. Yeah, I was also very intrigued by the chapter Conversation with Amy Cook on the comparison between Søren Kierkegaard and Jung, because there were these exciting parallels in their existential and psychological explorations and stuff like that. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what parallels can be drawn between them when it comes to their existential struggles in terms of faith and meaning?
Yeah. First of all, I mean, Kierkegaard was a man of faith. He wouldn't have said this, I don't need to believe, I know. He would maybe say something very different from that.
Yeah.
I mean, what he had very much experience of Kierkegaard was suffering. He speaks about the sort of the thorn in his thigh, or he has always carrying this wound. Yeah? So he's a very wounded, or if you want to say neurotic or pained individual. But I think what they share is this belief actually that suffering is necessary, that it's within suffering, or to find the right way to relate to our suffering, that healing is possible. It's not by reducing it or getting rid of it. It's by engaging with it, or maybe accepting it, or seeing what it wants to speak to us about, that we can also develop as human individuals. They don't use the same words, but they both believe that there is a human self that wants to become realized. We talk about self-realization today, and everything from Maslow and peak experiences, self-realization. But these two men, being religious or spiritual, they speak about the self as something that is coming into being. We are still in the process of becoming who we are. We are not yet who we are. We are to become who we are. We are in the process of becoming who we are. So they both have a very prospective sort of attitude towards development and towards the human psyche, which I think is very positive, if I can say so. Because I mean, it's important, of course, to go back, and psychoanalysis has a lot to do with going back in order to go forward. But there's something in the approach of looking at psyche and looking at the human individual as something that's not ready yet. Just because you're X years old or an adult, you're not ready. The self continues to grow. And this you also see, for example, for dream work and other things, that things never really stop. They continue to develop and change. And Jung and Kierkegaard, they never met. And Jung, the few things he wrote about Kierkegaard was rather negative. He had a negative view of Kierkegaard. He spoke about that he had no real substance, or that he sort of implied that he was more like an intellectual of sorts, or that he wasn't grounded, which I find just shows that he never read him. Because Kierkegaard, if there's anything, there's a lot of substance and there's a lot of weight to his word, and he really speaks for and about his own experience. And that's what's similar. They're using their own experience, but they mask it in different ways. Jung's whole work is his theory, if you like. It's very much based on his own experience with patients, but also this what they call the Red Book period, where he had his own encounter with his unconscious. So many of these insights that he formulated as theory was lived and experienced in his own process. And I'd say similarly with Kierkegaard, he puts a lot of emphasis on the human experience, and that the human self is unique. Kierkegaard, in my understanding, emphasizes actually the relationships more, relationship to others and relationship to community. And that Jung sometimes lacks a little bit, or at least the interpretations of Jung becomes often very focused on the individual. Although there are cases where Jung speaks about you cannot individuate throughout the relationship, and still it's a very solo path. And clearly Kierkegaard was not a social butterfly. He was very much on his own chamber. But but he, I would say that Kierkegaard and Jung, Kierkegaard emphasizes more the dimension of reaching sort of outside of yourself in order to give something back as well to the community. But I personally also think Kierkegaard is really very practically helpful for the analytic work. He was really a depth psychologist before there was such a term. And he's very astute in his clinical, almost observations of human nature and what makes up a human self, what makes up a false self. He doesn't use those words, but he's speaking about all these things. What is it, 60 or 100 years before it became like a part of the more public discourse. So I think Kierkegaard is very helpful for for people who take their interiority seriously. And he's not only, gloomy and dark, or melancholic, he's also very witty and extremely poetic especially how he speaks about love and love. I mean, is a big theme in Kierkegaard, less so in Jung, and this is also something Jung sort of owns, that he never sort of dared taking on writing much about love. And I think Kierkegaard he's not shying away from it, and he has very, very deep and profound understanding of love that I think probably many of us could benefit from today.
I have some more questions, some short ones. I wanted to ask you if your first real meeting with Christianity happened Jungian analysis. Was this your first? I mean, I know you've had met it before, in the periphery in society and stuff like that, but did you learn Christianity through kind of learning Jung?
Yeah, I wasn't raised very Christian, although I chose to do confirmation. I was still mostly that's for my because of my peers, and I wasn't deeply engaged in that process. I cannot say I was just a teenager running around and did what my friends did, honestly. But I don't have this sort of Jung sort of any of that. I have more of a lack of Christianity, both in culture and in family. But so Christianity came in through my own process, and that's connected to the Jungian process. But it quickly gets kind of confusing if you follow Jung into Christianity. That's why I started the podcast, and that's why we compiled these conversations to sort of be more of an introduction, or maybe a continuation of if you're interested in Jung, but you want to go deeper, or there's something around this type of religion that comes up as questions to you. Then we sort of put the book together to be some sort of introduction then. So I engaged. It was both through personal experience and also through studying and reading that this became necessary to engage with in this way. So it was not something I wished for. It was dragged.
That's awesome. Yeah. It just happened, kind of.
I guess it's sometimes the case that you're dragged into things. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I think it's honestly maybe the last place I've thought I would see myself engaging with these topics. I would laugh at this person who takes it so seriously.
I would do the same, having this conversation with you, so I can relate 100%. But there's still, I think that is why I'm so interested in this kind of innate drawnness into it, because I don't know where it comes from. So, but I'm finding something in reading about it in your book and feeling connected to it and developing interest to read more and learn more. But on another tangent that maybe goes too far away from the book, but I'm going to mention it shortly anyhow. I read a book a couple of weeks ago. It's called Spruce Forest People, How Nature Became the Religion of Swedish People. And it's a book written by David Tuffiel. He's a historian of religion. And in it, he kind of explores how more and more secularized Swedes turn to nature to find, this place of contemplation or spiritual experiences, even that, makes us feel part of something bigger, to have like a sense of, belonging or existence, or being something smaller also, in something bigger. And that also makes me think about, he also mentions this in his book, that, going back 2,000 years in time, or 1,500 years in time, the pre-Scandinavian, Old Norse religion was, profound in its connection to nature. So it's almost like its remnants are sneakily finding its way back to Swedish society, or like a secular people in Sweden, which I find very interesting. So I don't know, but I think that, I'm very preoccupied with this question of, you don't have to.
No, I think this is very interesting. I mean, I've had this conversation with Sean McGrath, the philosopher, and also very steeped in Jungian psychology and psychoanalysis on this. We have another podcast called Secular Christ. Talk about Christianity and say in the secular age, and we're sort of going back in the last season to old church fathers and looking at
Mm.
So some thinkers like Meister Eckhart, who lived in the 15th century, but just, and he speaks, I should say, a lot about this sort of a religion without a religionless religion, or a religion without this. So I mean,
Yeah.
and of course that's been very popularized in the last 40 years, the idea of spiritual but not religious. That's nothing new. But again, spirituality can just be also flaky, self-centered, narcissist. But there is that critique from psychoanalysis, and there's a definite truth to that. It can be just the worst avoiding, method you can have for just not having any type of real relationship. So I think I'm very critical to spirituality. I'm very critical to Christianity, and you can be that, but you can also engage with it. You can also see that there is something there. We don't throw it all out because we did that when we were 14 and we rebelled. We can. So I think when people, in whatever way they discover this, I mean, I think that's interesting. And the idea that maybe the religious instinct, or as you would say, is as alive as ever, but we will find it's finding it's being fed through the forest or through analysis or through other
and like you say, like holding these two poles together and kind of, see what comes out of it. You don't necessarily have to ascribe yourself to one of them, but just see like what comes out of holding both at the one time, this tension that kind of it creates.
You sound very Jungian right now, Lisa. When you speak like this, holding the tension of opposites and see what comes out of it. This is exactly. I mean, it very much resonates. I think that's, but it's very difficult, no?
Yeah, because you have all of these different expectations of yourself from others, and even doing this interview and speaking about religion and having that put on the internet as a Swedish person with a whole there is like a lot of anxiety attached to it, because so it is kind of, but I'm very much for this this holding, this like polar holding that is also introduced in the book, kind of that you hold both sides, and we don't have to like chastise one of them and be like, that doesn't belong here. We can see for ourselves and hold them and see what they can do good for us, how we can develop or further learn more about ourselves, or
absolutely. I think so. No, I think so too. And I think what Jungian psychology can do, possibly, it can definitely take you up in the air and like just go away into sort of mythland, and like, woo. But it can also bring you back to centuries and make some of these concepts and ideas useful for you or relating for you in a different way. That's what, as I said in the beginning, like Jung's project can be seen as him sort of smuggling in old wisdom, in new language. He would even say that. It's like, old wine in new bottles. Old wine in new bottles. But many of the things that Jung presents, they are not only come from Christianity. I should say that Jung was very deeply inspired by other religions. He was very well read. There's many other references. We haven't even spoken about alchemy, which he very much connects to Christianity. But I think, like this sort of taboo around Christianity that we're facing, it's also partly in the Jungian world. I mean, many people are open, but I think also many people are very prejudiced, against Christianity. Again, of all the harm that it brought to individuals through its institutions. But then I'm also always wish to remind people of that there's very much a very positive Christianity alive in the world today. And I personally only had to go 400 meters down to the closest church to know that they every Thursday let people come without any money to get their food packages. And probably it's the same where you sit or anywhere other cities. And these are individuals, church people, believers. So this is also important. Christianity goes further than psychology because it's in the collective, and it has a vision for healing the community and the collective. And that's bigger than the psychoanalytic vision. So Christianity is not only about my own coming together of opposites or becoming more peaceful, although that is essential, and very happy to experience a moment of peace. But it's really a vision for a different world. And that world is in the making. If that world is in the making. So
Yeah.
It's just to say, I feel like it's very expansive vision, but I'm still also just, scratching the surface off and trying to learn from.
But it's an interesting journey, interesting journey to take.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also, it's just like a small point that I was so intrigued when I saw that the current Pope has been in psychoanalysis in your book mentioned. Was it Jungian psychoanalysis? Do you know?
Fortunately not.
No, that would have been perfect.
Yeah, no, actually, fortunately. No, I think he was a classic psychoanalysis because, I think so, but I don't know that. But he called it psychoanalysis. I read it in an interview. I thought it was nice. And I think he, just that he shares that, he said, yeah, it was positive. But again, maybe that's also the thing, psychoanalysis or Jungian psychology is not religion. And it should not be religion. Yeah. Which was your favorite chapter? Was the one that you maybe already said that?
Yeah, I think that was my favorite chapter because I felt like I got a great introduction to. I got so interested in. I haven't read Kierkegaard yet, so I only like a little bit about and stuff. But I've had I'm a bit afraid of it. But now I feel like I have to read it. I have to I was so drawn into how you sit with the pain and to grow kind of in a certain way, or not sit, but you evolve with the pain, and you're always, someone in development. And I don't know, it just made me realize that I can, on a personal note, can find a very much comfort in Kierkegaard, I think. Maybe, but it's also probably really scary. Like she mentions also. She mentions also,
that he can be provoking you or engaging you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah, I think.
But other than that, I really, really enjoyed learning about the Book of Job and the answer to Job, and understanding a little bit more about, the view that Jung had of Christianity as something else than the established church, of course, and stuff like that. But also putting, and so to say, the evil side of God, opening up for that, because and discussing that, and because that was also something that was very fascinating for me and enriching to read about. But there was a lot of things that I was very, 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 very excited about. It was truly a great read, and I warmly recommend people to read it. Absolutely. When is it published? In
19th of August by Chiron Publications. So actually, I think we can add also into the show notes this discount thing. So if people want to order it, they can get it for a discount. But that's when it's out. And then there's going to be, available on all these shops and whatnot.
Very nice. Yeah, that would be really cool if we can like a coupon. That's super nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. It was great speaking with you.
Likewise.